tricky being coordinated when we're in different places.
Welcome to OK Smartass. This is the show where we put technology under the microscope. In this episode, the Pentagon confirms there is no intelligent life on Earth. Did I say intelligent? I meant alien. Or did I? Now time to look at what's happening in technology, innovation, and the gadgets that make our lives so much more exciting. Hi, I'm Patrick Bonello.
And I'm Tor Roxburgh. I'm a writer and a reader and someone who loves change and future-focused thinking. Patrick, what do you mean no intelligent life? Speak for yourself.
I'm a journalist. I've got a marketing and graphic design business. And Tor, it seems the end of 2022 has us all looking to the stars.
The Pentagon says no alien life discovered on Earth, but the search deepens. So the Pentagon and NASA have been looking at unidentified anomalous phenomena. It's not UFOs, it's not aerial phenomena. They've changed it to anomalous phenomena.
That's just so you can't say that with a mouthful of teeth. Try saying anomalous 3 times in a row.
The idea being like they're looking on land, they're looking underwater, they're looking in the sky, they're looking in space. So it just can't be aerial. It's moved beyond that.
Well, that makes sense, though. I mean, if you were an alien, you would be flying around all the time. If you were visiting a planet, you'd be on the ground. You'd be doing all sorts of stuff. You'd go surfing if it's warm weather in Australia.
Yes, indeed. Although highly unlikely that anything is alien, particularly the NASA study, but I guess the Pentagon as well, it's more about defense, really. And, you know, the NASA stuff, understanding the science of what we're seeing when we see things that we don't understand.
I don't think they put a lot of money towards it, though, did they? Does that kind of parallel the seriousness of how they're taking this?
Yeah, well, $100,000 for NASA and 12 very highly skilled scientists having a look at it. So, I mean, presumably they're people who are funded in their other roles and maybe they're just reviewing material. I don't know. And certainly I read some articles about the Pentagon report, and that, you know, some of the articles were quite scathing about that, saying that, you know, some of this has been called for by Congress people who don't know what they're talking about, and that we can't expect anything interesting or scientifically significant to come out of this. But who knows? I mean, it makes sense if we see things in land, sea, sky, or space that don't make sense. It makes sense that you would investigate it scientifically.
Yeah, unidentified anomalous phenomenon.
Yes.
I know we've spoken about this on the show. Do we think that aliens have ever visited the Earth? I mean, what's your personal take on this, Tor?
I think we can be confident they haven't, Patrick.
Yeah,
yes.
Look, I tend to agree with that as well. Although I was listening to a really great podcast on the History Channel about whether or not aliens built the pyramids.
Oh, I think that might be a bit of trash you were listening to, Patrick.
No, it's the History Channel. It's serious.
Yes. No chance, I think. No chance at all.
Look, I don't think so either. But can we talk about the Fermi Paradox at the moment? Because that's an interesting thing that came out of the 1950s. So
1960s, I think, wasn't it, Patrick?
Oh, okay.
Not sure.
Right. I'm happy to go with that.
Yeah.
It came out at some point and it wasn't recently.
Yes, after a lunch, Fermi said, "Where is everyone?" Allegedly.
Allegedly.
Yes.
So that's the quote. But basically the thought process behind it is, this place is big. I mean, so big. There are so many billions of galaxies and then billions of planets within those galaxies, the star systems and all that sort of stuff, that it stands to reason that life has to, because it's actually here, that it has to have started somewhere else as well. But the problem is the distance, isn't it? It's so far away.
Yes. Well, several problems really. Several suggestions about why we haven't heard from anyone. I mean, one idea is that life is rare, and that it's perhaps we're unique on a cosmic scale, although one thinks that sounds a bit like when we thought we were the center of everything, you know, and that the sun went around us instead of the
It's all
other
about
way
us,
around.
Tor. It's all about us.
Yeah, yeah. Or there's also the hypothesis that life is difficult and we wipe ourselves out. And then there's the zoo hypothesis that we're so primitive that everyone's out there, but they're keeping us sort of behind plexiglass, and we think we're alone. But there's a new paper written by Amri Wandel at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and he's talking about the distance and time problem, or space and time problem, I guess it is. And he's saying that, you know, we've been broadcasting for less than a century, and that our radio bubble is 200 light years wide, whereas the Milky Way, the entire Milky Way, is 100,000 light years wide.
So our evidence of us and our broadcast signals have gone nowhere near as far as they need to potentially reach any other civilization. And it stands to reason that the opposite means that if anybody else is broadcasting, there's very little opportunity or chance that we'll be able to pick up that signal. It's interesting because the other thing that I read in an article was that the idea is that most people will be listening for alien life, not directly flying out and looking for it. So it means that basically we're just all listening, and that's pretty boring if we're all sitting around listening. So if there is another civilization, it's listening as well. It's a bit like being on a dating app and waiting for the other person to start the conversation, Tor. So basically no one in the galaxy is going to get laid.
So yeah, we're wanting to date an alien, but no one's making the first move, you're saying?
No, so we're going to have to work out a way to swipe right galactically.
Yes. Although it could be a bad date. So maybe we're right to hesitate. Yeah.
That's a good point. So it's a waiting game, and it's a very much a patience game, isn't it? Because the thing that's always going to be the critical factor is that it's so far away, and if we want to go anywhere, conventional thought about the idea of not being able to attain the speed of light means that it's just going to be impossibly hard to get anywhere. So we're going to be sitting on our haunches for quite a while until we can get to go on that date tour.
Although maybe we are going to be uploaded into robot bodies. We did talk about that recently, I think, didn't we, Patrick?
Yeah, we did.
Yep. Instead of hibernating, we could be
uploaded our consciousness.
Yes, yes. Yes.
But I guess if you then built, so for example, if you built a consciousness and a robot on Mars, and then one on Uranus and other planets, you just inhabit them at different times and then be able to explore that way.
Yes.
That'd be kind of cool, wouldn't it? Yeah. I still want to go to the moon. In fact, in testament to that, you may have noticed my background on our little Zoom chat, because we're not in the same studio together. I've got my Zoom, and I have got company though. I've brought Fritz with me, my dog, and he's sitting on my lap at the moment. So if you're watching this on YouTube, this is Fritz. Say hi, Fritz. Yeah. But
and Patrick was so worried about getting COVID from me, he's gone into space.
Yes, exactly. I'm sitting on the moon with the Earth in the background, so I couldn't get further enough away from you, could I, Tor? And I mean that in a loving, caring sort of way, by the way. It's been a big year though for space. And when we think about a lot of the stuff that we talk on the show about, it certainly features highly. And I guess the reason for that is that, there's a real interest globally and a resurge in interest. The recent Artemis mission, new space station. So there's so much that we've been talking about, what's going on. So I kind of think it's exciting that space is so front and center again.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think it's just because it's really clear that we've got so many very grave problems with our climate on Earth?
That we're trying to escape the planet? Look, it's a good point, Tor. I guess, we talked about the blue marble in our last episode and looking back at the planet Earth, and it puts everything into perspective. And when we think of leaving the planet, I don't think from my perspective, it's not really about leaving the planet and trying to find somewhere else better. I think it gives us a perspective that, is an interesting way to look back on the Earth and to realize how precious it is.
Maybe.
So the other thing I love that we're looking into space to do at the moment is the idea of generating solar power in solar arrays in space. That's kind of a sci-fi thing coming back to Earth, even though the idea has been around for a while. I believe in the 1970s, there was a science fiction story that considered the idea of light, or basically using sunlight that's forever present when it's hovering above the Earth, because there's no shadow and there's no day and night, and that you could potentially be using microwaves to beam the energy back down to a receiving station somewhere on the planet.
Yeah, so they're talking about this again, and the UK, the US, the Chinese governments are all funding research, and the European Space Agency has a 3-year study named Solaris. So they're talking about, as you said, an array high up, I think above the satellite space station height, and then microwave beam to get the power back to Earth. But not much of the power gets back to Earth, I believe, Patrick, if we did it.
It's kind of, it's almost like a trickle charge, I think. I don't,
Yeah.
it takes, look, yeah, you're right. So the other concern, of course, is that, potentially birds flying through the beams could get microwaved, but they won't. So it's quite safe for animals because it is a direct line of sight technology. And they're calling them photovoltaic islands in the sky. I love that thought. I think it's so cool to have all these arrays. The only thing that would concern me, Tor, and I don't know if we haven't discussed this, is will that impact people who are doing, astronomers and the concerns they have over like bright lights? And if you're kind of sending energy, because they'd be pointing at the sun and not pointing back to Earth, so the microwaves, you can't see them.
Apparently, because of the distance, it's going to be no brighter than the space station.
Okay,
that's what I read.
Yep.
Yeah. Although you imagine that a whole lot of people who are already worried about curious things like 5G towers and and Bill Gates, etc., this is really going to spin them out.
Well, this is only this.
One imagines.
Yeah, it's only the power, 3% of the power of a microwave oven. It's bugger all.
I know, but I know people who are frightened of microwave ovens.
Oh, no, really?
Yeah. So, I think it'll just be the next thing on the list if it happens. I mean, it's only a study at this stage, but another source of infinite power sounds good.
One of the quotes in the article, though, was as long as just 10% of the power that actually hits the panels is delivered to the grid, then it can be economically viable, according to the study.
Yeah.
That's actually pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. And space again, China is getting very active with their space programs, aren't they?
They really are becoming a space superpower when we think that this has been a big year for the Chinese. They've got a permanently manned space station in space now, which is kind of, I guess a space station would be in space, wouldn't it? A space station in orbit, maybe we put it that way. That's kind of exciting, though, and it's a big thing for them. They want to become the main aerospace powers by 2030. This is something that China is, determined to do. And when they set their minds on something, gee, they're pretty good at it, aren't they? So we're talking about space transportation, space exploration, governance, civil space infrastructure. They're not just talking about doing a few experiments up there. They're looking at the big picture, aren't they?
No, although I wouldn't think that they were the ideal people to decide anything about governance, but yeah, well, good on them for getting their space station created. And it's not being used just by China. It is, I mean, one of the articles we read was clearly propaganda. However, it's clear that other nations are sending up experiments to their space stations. So although it's Chinese controlled, it's not completely closed to the rest of the world.
Absolutely. And I think that's an important thing. And also we spoke about this, that historically, independent nations have built their own space stations. So there was the original kind of the Mir space station, which was the Russian one, and then there was Skylab, which was the American space station. I've got a kind of a funny story about that tour, and I don't know if I've ever told you this. I'm not sure if I certainly haven't said it on air, but when I was working in radio, there was a really landmark situation when one of the shuttles flew up to the Mir space station, and it was going to dock with the Mir space station. And at the time, I was doing weekend news, and the person who I was doing news with, so I was on Fox FM and the other person was on Triple M. And the journalist that was doing the Triple M news was a bit lazy. They'd been demoted to working weekends with me. And so they decided.
A low point in someone's career.
It was a low. See, I was on my way up and they were on their way down. So I was climbing up the journalistic kind of ladder, and they were sliding down unceremoniously and ended up on their rear end next to me. And so they weren't really keen to do any work. And at the time, the way that we played interviews was we had them on what was called a cart. Now, a cart was like a cassette tape with an endless loop of tape in it. And so when you played an audio grab, the device was able to fast forward to the start, but you played it through and then it rewound or fast forwarded automatically, and it would be ready to start again, which was really cool. But because this person wasn't actually helping at all, I was doing all the work and recording the audio, and I had this really lovely grab from NASA explaining what was going to happen. And so it went along the lines of, you know, that the crew will be docking with the Mir space station. They'll extend the umbilical, and then the crew will make their way through the umbilical to the Mir and share a joint meal. And there was a slight pause between the end of joint and meal. So and I knew she wasn't going to check the audio grab, so I cut hers at the end of it that said they're going to extend the umbilical and share a joint. And so on my radio broadcast it said joint meal, and on hers it said joint.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, it was great. No one ever picked us up on it. I'm sure a lot of listeners laughed, but yeah. So, and they're going to go and share a joint.
Well, that would be understandable.
It was pretty funny. And so, because the other journalist hadn't checked the audio grab beforehand, which they were supposed to do, I could very easily have, recut it for them, but they didn't. And so that's what went to air on Triple M, which was really funny. And then from then on, they actually helped. So it served its purpose.
Oh, okay. So she noticed at least.
Oh, yeah. Yes, she did.
Oh,
and I think
did she say anything?
Didn't say a word.
No.
Didn't say a word. That was pretty.
So the
pretty
Chinese space station is called Tiangong, which means heavenly palace.
Isn't that lovely? I love that.
Yeah, that is lovely.
Cool.
Yeah.
I used to know what Mir meant, and I can't remember now.
You could Google it.
I'm just Googling it as we speak. Yeah. Mir. Let's see. Oh, peace or world. The Russian language, the word Mir, has two different meanings, so it can translate as peace or world. That's kind of interesting.
I think I like heavenly palace more.
Oh, look, heavenly palace is pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very poetic.
It is very, very poetic. But I also like the sentiment behind the Mir naming as well.
Yeah.
We just went for Skylab. Well, the Americans went for Skylab, and then fell on Australia. So there is a connection there.
Now, Patrick, we've talked quite a few times about space junk, and there's a new company called Outpost, founded in 2020, and they've got an interesting solution. And you like this, didn't you, Patrick?
I love this solution because one of our regular listeners to the show, we speak about our friend Ryan, who's the aerospace engineer, the rocket scientist. In fact, we've got an interview with him for our next episode. So do stay tuned with that one. We've done just a few interviews this year, and we thought we'd throw one into the mix. But I've done a number of paragliding excursions with Ryan. So we've both we have paragliding licenses. We bought our paragliders. I did 51 flights. I think he did more than I did. And so we did a bit of traveling around and did a lot of flying in New Zealand. And my last flight was in Victoria, in a place called Bright, which is just gorgeous. And I flew along there. So if you haven't ever been in a paraglider, give it a go, Tor.
I don't think I will, Patrick. I don't think I will. But the relevance here is that the paragliding used satellites.
Yeah, exactly right. This is really exciting because what it means is that there's a potential now for us to be able to, when I say us collectively, to get rid of junk, space junk, by paragliding it back to Earth. So
Yeah, now I have to confess that when I first read this, I had, you know, a mental image of a little person on a paraglider
sliding
grabbing the
back.
satellite and, you know, pulling the strings and flying back to Earth. No, no, listeners, it is
Wow.
kind of remote controlled paraglider. And it's a unified system. So Outpost sends up its satellite, the satellite functions. Then when it gets to the end of its life, it's got the paragliding equipment already in it, and then down it goes. But this is not the only bit of junk they're interested in. It's not just satellites, is it, Patrick? They've been talking about a way to get used equipment off the International Space Station.
Yeah, there's a lot of crap up there. In fact, it's getting pretty crowded on board with all the experiments. And once they're done, the problem is, what do you do with them? You don't just throw them into an airlock and push them out, because potentially that could become deadly
More
space
junk.
debris, more junk. So yeah, the
Yeah.
idea is that potentially they could attach paragliders to them and glide them back to Earth, which would be really interesting because it also means you're able to then, you know, look at the whatever the item is, and that could be a really good subject for further research into the effects of being in space, or, you know, micrometeorites, all sorts of things. So it's kind of interesting that, you know, it does have multiple, aside from just cleaning up what's floating around in space and being able to, you know, maybe potentially either reuse or study further these items that have been floating around.
Yeah, and that currently they do take cargo off the space station when they're, you know, when the shuttle goes up and down. But for smaller amounts of stuff, this ferry system would work really well. And ironically, the person who started this company also sent or created the first 3D printer that went up to the International Space Station and is still there clogging up, you know, their cargo space. So he might get to bring his own bit of junk down.
You know what I thought was really interesting about these paragliders as well is that they can do precision landings in their test flights. They've landed within 5 meters, or basically 16 feet of the target. That's pretty darn good. I don't think I
It
was ever
is.
within 5 meters of my target when I landed.
Yeah, well, maybe they'll one day have a person system with a spacesuit, and you can be,
Oh, that'd be
you
great.
know,
How cool would
rocketed
that be?
up and paraglided down.
Wow, that'd
Oh,
be so cool.
yeah.
You know, the first place I ever actually leaped off a cliff was called Taylor's Mistake. It's a,
Oh,
it's an ominous name, isn't it?
someone else had tried it before.
No, it was a sea captain who pulled into the wrong inlet, and so he was
Oh,
evidently, Mr.
okay.
Taylor made a mistake, and so they called it
Yeah.
Taylor's mistake. But no, it was a very ominous first flight for me when I leaped off, having to dodge sheep poo, because there were a lot of sheep in the way when we were launching at our spot in New Zealand. Because I think in New Zealand the sheep outnumber the population by many
Ah,
fold.
well, probably here as well.
Yeah, you're probably right
Patrick,
too.
back to Earth. You might be able to pick up on eBay a military device that has a chip in it that's got all sorts of biometric data.
This is a staggering story that I saw on Engadget. It was an article that basically said that there's been a lot of irresponsible handling of some of the high risk technology that came out of Afghanistan. So there was biometric readers that will, you know, basically have memory cards built into them. So when we talk about biometrics, we're talking about maybe scanning a retina, fingerprints, that sort of stuff is biometrics. So something that's unique to the individual. And it's staggering that it's and this was a New York Times article as well, that basically said that a lot of the people that assisted combatants, like, you know, American forces in both Afghanistan and Iraq, were recorded or, you know, verified using biometric data and these biometric reading devices. But the problem is that a team of German researchers have found that they didn't wipe the data from these biometric
Yeah.
before they put them up on eBay for sale.
So it wasn't clear to me whether the equipment had been left behind and then it was being sold by the Taliban and people like that. I think some of it wasn't it?
Oh no, I thought that what happens is that they, we used to have a place in Australia called Aussie Disposals, and so when the
Yeah.
military gets rid of items, they then can put them up for auction or get rid of them that way. So I don't think they just were left there. I think it was more a case that they were, they were basically decommissioned and then sold off. And in this particular instance, the data and information was still on there, which is a staggering thought. And it made me really reflect on the fact that there's a high percentage of people when they sell their phones that they also don't wipe the data. I know we've spoken about this on one of our one of our podcasts previously, and it was quite a while ago. But the reality of it is when people get rid of their phones, and let's face it, lots of us do, well, except for you and me who store them in drawers and just keep holding onto them. But the interesting thing is that there's a really high percentage of people who don't wipe the phones. And so, my advice would be don't do what the US military did in this case. Jump onto YouTube and find out how to wipe the data. Because the concern with, and getting back to this story, is that the concern is that people who assisted the military, now that places like, in this case, Afghanistan is back in Taliban rule, if they get a hold of this, they could find the people who, effectively collaborated with the military, and their very lives could be at risk. So they could be targeted, which is really falls into the wrong hands. And these German researchers did just that. They jumped online to buy this secondhand tech, and they did find information on there, staggering amount of information that related to people who potentially could be at high risk from, something like the Taliban.
It's amazing, isn't it, Patrick? Because, in fiction land, in streaming TV movie land, the military is always so careful of, data and information. This seems extraordinary.
It does. The other thing that's interesting, do you know the name of this group of researchers, what they out of Germany?
No, what is it?
It's the Chaos Computer Club.
Oh, wow.
That's the best. So they bought 6 of the devices on eBay for under $200. I reckon that's a bargain, just quietly. But they and it has been thought that the Taliban had actually seized similar devices as well. But on the memory card of one device, they found names, nationalities, photographs, fingerprints, and iris scans of over 2,600 people, which is a staggering number of people, isn't it?
Yeah, really shocking.
And they were used in Kandahar, Afghanistan. One was used in Jordan. And so that had fingerprints on it as well. So, and also of US military personnel.
Yeah. So it's not just the military, it's vacuum cleaners that might be capturing and sharing our data. No, not quite. It was the test vacuum cleaners.
Okay, this is an interesting one because you have on your, I guess, Christmas bucket list, you did want desperately. Now, you're going to break the news to us. You didn't get one, did you?
No, I didn't. I ran out of money at Christmas. We were on short rations until the next lot comes in. And so no Roomba for me.
Well, that's a bit of a shame, but it now seems that is it the Roomba? The Roomba, I should say. I keep calling it the Roomba. That's the dance, isn't it?
That's the dance.
It's the Roomba. So the iRobot Roomba is pretty popular, and in fact, it's one of the most popular. And we know that it's recently the company went up for sale. Amazon's buying it, but a number of units that were used for test were then sold to their staff. And I believe there was a disclaimer that basically said to them that, they had to sign a disclaimer to be able to get the device at a discount price. And now it seems that some of them were taking photographs of people and it was being saved.
Okay, so I understood a little bit differently. I thought that these photographs were taken during the testing period, and that the reason they were being captured and stored and shared between staff members, perhaps on the wrong platforms, was that the humans had to label the photos for the machine learning system to begin to understand what's a wall, what's a pot plant, what's a person, I shouldn't run into people. And so inevitably, you know, when these prototypes were out in being tested, people were told, do be careful, you know, that you don't let it in the bathroom with you when you're in there, and watch whether it's too close to children and stuff like that. But inevitably it did photograph, you know, people such as a woman on the toilet and a
And a young
child in a
child.
bathroom. Yeah.
But I think they were then
And
sold
then,
off to the staff as well.
were they?
Yes,
Okay.
they were sold off. Yep.
So when I first read this, I thought this is a really limited problem of staff members having used the wrong platform to discuss the images in breach of their contracts. But you were saying it's also a potential problem even now because of the Internet of Things.
Yeah, that's right. Because when we think about the Internet of Things, there's connectivity with all of our devices. So Internet of Things effectively means if you've got a smart globe, if you've got a smart TV, a vacuum cleaner, all of that connects to the internet, which means it's part of the Internet of Things. And the concern is that, you know, these devices are purchased, they've got cameras on them because they need cameras to be able to navigate around the house. What does that then mean if they get hacked? And I guess that's the big concern, that, you know, if they do get hacked, then potentially it places, you know, it's the kind of weakest link scenario, isn't it? You know,
Yeah.
whether it's the router that you get, because most routers, when you buy a router, the standard, you know, username password is admin and password.
Yeah.
It's either admin or admin password is what comes with them, you know. So, and very few people then change them. So, and who would change them, and who gets told to change them? You know, they get rolled out across every household and pretty well everywhere in all the Western countries in the world. And I mean, have you changed the password on your router, Tor?
Probably, but I do things like that. Yeah.
But it's interesting to think of, and there could be potentially millions of images that are, you know, were used initially with the you know, the Roomba, but but I mean, again, they were marked though as well. So all the initial test devices had been marked with a sticker to make it really clear that that was video recording was in progress. So at no time, you know, and they were advised, as you say, for them not to let them near young children, and also not to you know, let them into personal spaces where you might be doing something that could be photographed.
Yes, but presumably the Roombas now are not storing images, they're just seeing.
Yes.
In a sense.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, so they do have sensors on them, but those sensors don't continue or record them. They're basically just used to navigate their little world. And I think you program them as well. I think you actually give them a set path. So the first time you use them, you map out where you want them to go. But has that turned you off at all, Tor? You still want your robot vacuum cleaner?
No, I want my robot vacuum cleaner. Okay. And yeah.
Well, it's a nice little segue to jump from vacuum cleaners to battery swapping. I love the idea of motorcycles, electric motorcycles with a switchable battery, because let's face it takes a long time to charge you know, an electrical vehicle. And so what they're doing in Kenya at the moment is they've got this great rollout scheme where people can buy a new electric bike, and then anywhere in Nairobi they can swap the battery over when they need a new battery. So the idea being is you don't sit down and wait for however long it takes to charge, you just swap the battery over and you can click and go, a bit like we do that in Australia with those gas cylinders. When you go to have a barbecue, you just walk up to a swap and go, and they swap the barbecue you know, gas cylinder. And in the same way, they can make, you know, electric mobility a much better option, a much more viable option, because, you know, in countries where pollution is a real problem, and I guess every country in the world pollution is a problem, but it means that you can actually reduce the fumes of you know, petrol-driven engines to a great degree, and this would be a fantastic thing. So I really want to applaud the fact that the government there has made this initiative to do the swap and go with their battery-powered bikes.
And I think the thing that's made it feasible is that the price is the same as a petrol motorbike, because the companies are not selling the batteries. The batteries remains the property of the manufacturer, and they're the really expensive part of the electric motorbike. So people can afford to buy it. I think it's under $2,000 because of the battery being excluded. And there's several companies that are doing this in Kenya, but it seems like it's an ideal playground for this to work, because their electricity supply is pretty good, and there's enough capacity with consumers to make the purchase in the first place.
All they need now is a couple of solar power stations in the sky, don't they?
In space,
in space,
yeah,
yeah.
and they'd be
And they could be
right.
beaming the
Yeah.
electricity as well. You know, it's interesting that we're talking about effectively a third world country using this battery swapping technology, when here in Australia, I read an article by Anthony Anderson who was saying that he was exceptionally frustrated because he was in a queue of people with his Tesla waiting up to 90 minutes to use one of the charging stations. So not only are you waiting 90 minutes to get to a charger, then you've got to wait while the vehicle charges. So talking hours to actually be able to go from point A to point B, and that is always going to be the problem with batteries when you're waiting for them to charge or queuing up for them to charge. So I think there was a bit of a scathing article that he wrote saying this is crazy stuff. We need more charging stations in Australia.
Yeah, but at the bottom of the article, happily, it said that BP is going to install about 600 EV charging points in their petrol stations around Australia. And I've been wondering when that's going to happen. And perhaps this is the way it's going to be. We have to wait for the big fuel companies, service stations to install chargers everywhere.
It makes perfect sense, because if people are going to be sitting around waiting for 20 minutes, even for a small charge, they're going to go in and buy something. They're going to go to the shop. They're going to sit around and use the cafe. So it makes perfect sense that, putting in a charging station. And we've seen the irony of all this is that, Tor, I know you led a local campaign in our small town to try to get a charging station, because within the direct epicenter of where we live, we're the centre of our shire. And as far as I know, there are no charging stations within our shire, are there?
There are none.
Yeah, that's crazy stuff. And
Which
it's quite a
is
distance as
crazy.
well. We're talking of a distance from end to end of what, probably about 45 to 50 kilometres from Ballarat
yeah, I
all the
guess
way
so.
to
It would be.
yeah. That's a long
Yeah.
distance, isn't it? When you think about the fact that how many petrol stations are there in that same space?
Lots. Yeah.
Lots and lots and lots of petrol stations. So lots of fuel stations, but no electric charging stations, which seems to be just bizarre when there is such a big uptake on all of these electric vehicles as well. So it's the chicken or the egg stuff. And at this point, I don't know who's losing out, the chicken or the egg, but one of them is.
I'm sure that the reason is that if you adopt technology too early, you're going to get dated technology. You have to jump in at exactly the right time. If it's a big capital investment, and the service stations, obviously, they've been waiting for the right moment, and perhaps it's now.
Yeah. Look, the other great thing about being able to put in the infrastructure for electric charging is that you don't need to have giant tanks. You're not putting in, big holes in the ground and filling it with petrol. The beauty of this is that you don't even need to have it in a petrol station. Potentially you could put it out the front of a supermarket or on the street. And that's what a lot of countries are doing and a lot of places are doing.
I'd prefer that. I think that is better for towns if people are walking around, going into shops and buying things. However, Patrick, I don't think that's the way it's going to be. I think it's going to, you think of the huge investment that those service stations have with their land and their staff. They're not just going to let that go. That's where they'll be, I'm sure.
Yeah, it does make sense. So you're not going to be running an extension lead out the front of your place with a little sign on it saying, please feel free to charge at my house?
Yeah, maybe I should. Yeah.
Maybe you should, because you live on the main street. No one's going to come to my place. I'm way outside of the main street. I'm too far away. Hey, switching from, I guess, tech to the mind, I've always find these stories really interesting. And so basically neuroscientists working on what they're calling a mood decoder that can measure depression, which is an
Yeah, so
yeah.
scans that pick up a different behavior in well, a different image in the brain when someone's depressed between someone who is and isn't depressed. But a very small study, Patrick, I think 3 people we're talking about.
Yeah, so this was a study reported on by The Verge, I saw, and it was via MIT's technology review. So that was being re-reported. And they'd been looking at things like Parkinson's disease and epilepsy. So that's what the research the deep brain simulation was based on that initially. But it's interesting. And just in answering your question, yeah, it was only a very small study, and a lot more people need to be kind of looked at initially. But a mood decoder, I don't know. How do you feel about your mood being detected? Because in China, remember they had the idea of a face detection technology, so that if you looked grumpy when you got up to work, that you wouldn't be let in.
Yes, indeed. And look, when these sorts of developments are in the medical area, and they're looking at helping people who've got chronic health problems. So here, looking at where in the brain you should put an electrode for deep brain stimulation that would actually work because it's in the right place and it might alleviate depression. That's great. But when you see things used for control of, big populations, then obviously that's the really dark and horrible side.
Yeah, you're right. This study was, I just looking at the figures there, Tor, it was 3 of 5 were identified in this instance. So it was a study of 5 people, and 3 of them were actually looked at specifically, and they were looking at a part of the cortex that fired when they were feeling better, and then the opposite when they were feeling low. So they were able to track when a person was feeling uplifted or feeling okay, and then when they had those dark thoughts that are associated with depression. And that's really fascinating, because I guess non-invasive treatment or non-invasive studies like this are really a very positive way to try to see what's happening and to correlate whether this is consistent across different people as well. It's going to need a much study group, but
Patrick, the idea in this for these researchers is that they're going to implant electrodes. So this was like having a look, seeing if they could work out exactly what's going on, and then implanting the electrodes. Because when they've implanted electrodes and tried to improve depression before, it hasn't worked well. And the thought being that they weren't putting them in exactly the right place. So now they plan to study 12 altogether, people with severe depression. And, that's the kind of the narrow focus of this study. But as you say, it could have non-invasive applications in the future if they do find they can pinpoint and
yes, it's getting to the right
way.
part of the brain, isn't it? Yeah, exactly. But I think, look, there are lots of drawbacks when you've got small numbers, and physically having to enter the brain is a pretty of a scary thought as well.
And expensive, apparently.
It is $22,000 or something. I can't remember what
although that seems quite cheap, actually, when you think about it. $22,000. I mean, I think something like a knee replacement, that'd be about $50,000 or $60,000, and this is brain surgery.
Yeah. Understanding depression and how debilitating it can be has a lot of implications. And, when we know that if we took a broad population census and we looked at how many of people who actually suffer from depression over the span of their lifetime, it's something that affects a lot of people all over the world. And this could potentially help, destigmatize the condition, and be able to kind of chemically identify and say, well, this is something that's real. Because I think that there is a big stigma about depression, and it is something that affects people in such severe ways that this would be a really positive step forward.
And the next story, Patrick, talks about how to keep yourself healthy, and keep your brain healthy and your mood healthy. And the factors are not surprising. I think, you know, even without the study, we could probably very well guess what they are: physical exercise, being social, and having strong interests. But nice to know that that's in fact the case.
Well, I thought it was staggering that there are 100 billion nerve cells that collaborate to keep you nimble and quick thinking, Tor.
Yes, that's good.
So
Yeah.
there's an argument not to drink. But as you say, there are some, really key kind of areas of focus, the physical exercise, being social and having interests. But being mobile and getting around and taking part in sports and regular exercise, whether it's out walking the dog, these are all really important things that, as you say, they sound like a no-brainer, don't they? But
yes, but it's a question of doing it, isn't it?
Yeah, it takes a while to form a routine. And I think that's the key thing for all of us, that if we want to partake in this sort of stuff, we've got to have a routine. We've got to be able to set up a time and make sure we do it. But maybe that's a New Year's resolution.
Yeah, I was about to say, Patrick, now is the moment to work all of that out because, 2-3 days, it's next year. It's the new year. Have you got any resolutions yourself?
No, look, I don't normally do New Year's resolutions. I guess I'd like to say to try to eat healthier. I'm pretty good, and to get back to the gym more consistently if I plucked 2 things. So it's all health related. What about you?
Yeah, I think some new experiences would
Paragliding?
be good. Not necessarily adventurous experiences, just like out in the world stuff. I spend a lot of time in my office. In my house. I think it would be good to go to Melbourne a bit more and maybe go see a film like you did recently.
Look, can I plug this? Because I'm so taken away. If you're going to go see the new Avatar film, then go see it at IMAX in 3D or see it in a cinema in 3D. It was mind-blowing. And I went with some friends. One of our friends of our podcast, of course, is Craig Harper, because we do a lot of stuff on his podcast, the U Project. And I also met up with my nephew, who had already seen it, and then went and saw it again and blew him away, having seen it in 3D for the second time.
Oh, great. Well, more of that for me. And I'm a bit jealous that I said no, but I have got COVID, so I don't think you'd want me there.
Well, you've been listening to OK Smartass, the last one for the year, the podcast brought to you by a nerd and a smartass. I'm Patrick Bonello. You can contact us by visiting our website at oksmartass.com or email nerds@oksmartass.com.
I'm Tor Roxburgh. If you like getting suggestions for books, podcasts, and viewing, you can find my newsletter via my Facebook and Instagram profiles. We'll see you again, not the next episode, because the next episode we're having a lovely interview with Ryan, and Patrick's doing the tennis and I'm going on a writer's retreat. But if you'd like to help the show, we'll be back again the following episode. And please do tell a friend, share a post online, or take the next step and support us via Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/OKSmartass to sign up.
Well, you actually will hear us because we're doing the interview, but we're really excited that we get to speak to our good mate Ryan. So thanks to our Patreon supporters and our listeners who get in touch. If you like what we do, make sure to hit the subscribe button and make sure you share it with your friends. And we're looking forward to seeing you all in the new year.